Hello, this is Greg Ligon. Welcome to this edition of Conversations with Leadership Network. Today I have the privilege of getting to spend a little bit of time talking with Mark Jobe at New Life Church in Chicago. And Mark, welcome. We're so glad to have the opportunity to visit a little bit this morning.
Great to be with you, Greg. I'm in a little bit of a noisy setting, but hopefully you can hear my voice.
You bet. I mean, it's Chicago. I mean, that's what you're about, and a lot of what we want to talk about today. So, hey, just tell us a little bit about kind of the background of New Life, and then we're going to move in after we've heard a little bit of that. We're going to move in and begin to talk some about some specific things that you guys are doing related to multi-site. But I'd like for everybody to kind of have a little bit of a background of the church.
Well, as you said, we're in Chicago, so I think to understand New Life, you have to understand cities and Chicago. I've been pastoring this church now for over 25 years. I started when I was 5 years old. I'm just kidding. So we're a multi-site church, and our vision really is how can the church be resilient in mega cities of the world? And so we view ourselves as a church that feels more like a movement. If you can picture cities of over 1 million people or more, we view them as a compilation of multiple tribes that come together in one mega center. Some people look at the city as a monolithic culture, everybody's the same, but that's not true. We have the fresh immigrant that came from China. We have the young professionals that have moved from Wisconsin and Ohio and love the sort of hip neighborhoods and have no children. We have the Mexican immigrant that just doesn't speak English and maybe is undocumented. We have the middle-class families, the African-American families. It's a compilation of tribes. So we've asked ourselves this question: what does a church look like that is able to reach multiple tribes around the city, but yet feel like one? So at New Life, we're one church that currently meets at 20 locations throughout the city. We have 38 worship services that happen every Sunday in different communities, from Humboldt Park, which is a Puerto Rican black neighborhood, and a lot of gang activity, very ethnic, to Lincoln Park, which is much more a high-end type of community with mainly white college educated that moved in from the suburbs. And we come together, but as one church with one vision, one mission, one message to spread throughout the city, the 77 communities of the city of Chicago. And that's kind of what we're throwing ourselves into. Sometimes good, and sometimes just kind of fumbling forward.
That's great. I know you opened your last campus, or your most recent campus, I guess I should say, number 20, last week, I believe. April the 6th. Maybe it's been 2 weeks now. Tell us a little bit about that one. As I understand, that's the first one that you've used video on. Everything else is live teaching. So tell us a little bit about number 20 and why the move to video.
Yeah, it was campus number 20. We had a little over 200 people that showed up for the first service, so we're super pumped up and excited about that. You know, one of our values has been we wanted to make sure that the communities that we reach have teachers, preachers, and pastors that look like them, that their skin color reflects the skin color of the people that they're reaching. And so we're in a very multicultural city. And so we've resisted video not because of any theological issues, but more in a pragmatic way. Two issues have been important to us. We wanted to be able to multiply rapidly like a movement. And we want to make sure that the diversity of each neighborhood is reflected in the teaching pastor. This happened to be about 3 miles away from one of our largest campuses, about 1,500 people. And it was not super far away, but the pastor at the larger campus felt like there was some railroad tracks that people on that side of the railroad tracks didn't like to go into the city even though it was close. And so we opted to make it more of an extension of the larger campus, having the staff serve that campus, realizing that people in that community were not going to drive across the railroad tracks to the other area. And so it's an experiment for us. We have a great core that stepped up to the plate. Actually, it's the first campus that we started without adding any staff as well. So this is, it's in a high school, and the couple that leads this is they're both teachers, administrators, but we launched a core, did not add any staff, and they're doing great so far. I'll even tell you in 6 months more how well it's gone. So this is all run by really volunteers that are leading that. We're piping in the video, but have a great team that's just reaching out and building that community.
That's awesome. It'll be fun to see what happens with that. One of the things that was curious to me that you were just speaking of as you kind of gave the description of the church was you said you see yourself more as a movement than a church. Say a few words about that. You know, what are some distinctives that want you to begin to think about yourself as a movement? Anything that kind of comes to mind, purposes?
Yeah. So I was raised in the mission field and had church planting sort of pumped into my DNA. And as a missionary, we were always taught to think multiplication, pioneer, unreached territory. And so when we started seeking to reach Chicago and multiply throughout Chicago, we started realizing that the model of a movement really represents much more what we're trying to do and what we feel like. When I say movement, I mean, I look at rapid mobilization. I look at not centralized as much as decentralized. I look at indigenous leadership. I look at self-sustaining, self-propagating. I would like for this thing to get so out of control that we can't keep up with it. We're not there yet, and we're far from it, but it's starting to feel a little bit more like that. So we've started to use the terminology movement churches. As we look at not only Chicago, but other cities around the world, we're asking ourselves, what does it feel like not to plant just a church in those urban centers, but a movement church? That means that it would be a church that would, from day one, embrace rapid mobilization, flow throughout the city, not be institutional, be very relational, very indigenous, self-perpetuating, as I said before. And so that's a little, that's that idea of a river flowing throughout the city. We're not looking at one size fits all. We're not necessarily replicating congregations of 1,000 people. I mean, some of our locations have 75 people, and we're okay with that because if it fits the context of that neighborhood, then we're okay to plant a 75 and a mile away another one of 75, as long as we're growing, raising leaders, multiplying, and continue to reach new people and make disciples effectively. That's what we mean by movement.
That's awesome. You said you've alluded to a couple of times the vision to take this movement, this model, this approach outside Chicago to other cities, large metropolitan cities around the world. Let's talk a little bit about the vision for that, and then have you already begun that work?
So a few years ago, we started asking ourselves, how can we get more strategically involved in missions? And even the whole idea of missions is a word that we kind of shy away from, because we really view everybody on mission for Jesus, and it's just a matter of locality. And so some of the old terminology of international missions, we shy away from that because we just look at it as the church moving forward, expanding, reaching people. And so we started asking ourselves, all right, we have tons of missions teams that have gone out, tons of people that have gone overseas, supporting different projects, but what unique contribution can we give? And I believe, Greg, that God uniquely prepares us for the contributions that we're going to give. And so we first of all looked at ourselves. Who are we? And what is it maybe that we can contribute that not everybody can, or what is it that we can contribute? So we decided, well, we're all about city. We're a church that, I mean, that's who we are. We understand city. We don't really understand rural, and we don't understand suburban that well. So we narrowed it down to let's focus on cities. Let's do what we know how to do best, which means raise leaders, plant churches, multiply. And so we've selected 10 cities of 1 million people or more outside of Chicago that we would like to see plant movement churches in. So we've already planted number 1, which is in Querétaro, Mexico. It was a phenomenal thing. I love the story of Querétaro because, you know, we met with Ray Bakke, who is this sort of urban theologian. He's 80 years old now, but he just knows more about cities and the theology of cities of anybody that I know. And we met in the Sears Tower, and we said, if you were to choose 10 cities, Ray, how would you choose them? You know, and he had this, you know, older, gruffly voice that said, follow the streams of immigration. And he let us see that there are immigrants flowing into cities and that there are streams of people flowing out of cities. And so he encourages us to follow the streams that have come in and gone out. So our first stream was Mexico because Chicago has a huge Mexican population. And so we followed it to a city called Querétaro. We had some relationships there, some contacts there. It was birthed, our Querétaro mission was birthed out of our campus that's in Little Village Community, which is a Mexican immigrant neighborhood. And they did it sort of the Mexican way, so to speak, in the sense of embracing. It wasn't organized, but it was all about people and community and relationship. They just rallied a bunch of people and sent over close to 30 people down to Querétaro. And most of them spoke Spanish already because a lot of them Mexican background. They had food around. They just gathered around food, sent people over there to serve. And it was just a beautiful thing. It was so organic, so relational, so non-standard middle-class white American that I loved it. It just birthed very naturally. We sent a bunch of work teams down there to help build like the tent and lay the foundation for where the church was going to be. And in October, we did the grand opening of New Life Querétaro. There's a good solid group that's already looking at another part of the city, multiplying another part of the city. We also planted in Spain because I grew up in Spain, and have a church there, very relational. A lot of young people. Meets in a oversized warehouse garage, but already is looking at planting in other parts of Spain as well. So the goal is to bring these pastors in via Skype. So we have these Skype meetings via Chicago. They join our pastoral meetings. We're at the front end of this, so we're still trying to figure it out. And there's a lot of things that we're just wrestling through. We don't want to have, we want to be very low control, very empowering, very relationship-driven, vision-driven, values-driven, but we don't want to control things, so to speak, from America. We want it to be very indigenous.
That's exciting. It'll be fun to see what God does through those cities and the other cities that He'll call you to, wherever the next streams take you. I want to switch gears now for just a second. And would love for you to share maybe a couple of resources that have been helpful to you. Maybe it's the books that are on your nightstand, or maybe it's something that's, what is it, something that's forming your leadership currently?
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit, and I would say a couple of things have been great in shaping who we are. There's been a couple great books that, one of the books that I read a few years back that isn't a very well-known book, but I think it's one of the best books on movements that I've ever read. It's called Movements That Change the World by Steve Addison. He's more of a researcher. He's not a movement leader, but he captures the history of movements, studies the Methodist movement, the Moravian movement, and he gives 5 characteristics of movements that change the world. Anybody that's really interested in that kind of approach of movement out of control, spreading rapidly, I would highly recommend that book. I think that getting into an education process that pushes you to study, learn, and interact with people that normally you wouldn't outside of your sphere is great. 2 organizations that really helped me do that. One was I went into graduate school. I didn't want to just do a doctorate for the sake of doing a doctorate. I wanted to do a doctorate that would expose me. And so I got my doctorate in transformational leadership, focusing on urban centers through Baki University, which sent me to China and a bunch of different cities. And I love the fact that most of the leaders there were international. The other really powerful, especially in our early days, that really helped shape us was, here's a plug for Leadership Network. That also was just, what helped us through Leadership Network was the idea of getting together with people that were doing similar things that we were doing, but we had never even heard of them. And interacting, rubbing shoulders with them in not a formal, this is how you do it, but more of a conversational community. That was super, super helpful. I still have a bunch of relationships that I created during that time that were incredibly helpful in that process. The other thing I would highly recommend is just, I would recommend pursuing mentors that would speak into what you're doing from a different perspective. I've really valued mentors that have spoken into my life. They may not be doing what I'm doing, but they are in the area of leadership and growth. And if you can nail down a couple mentors that are willing to speak into your life, that's huge. I've taken that as a real, and let me do reverse mentoring as well. I've decided that one of the things I want to do is pick 12 people that I'm going to invest in every year. I call it the circle of influence. And I spend time, most of them are younger leaders. I've learned so much from them. It's not just picking a seasoned leader that knows a lot. Sometimes it's getting a young 20-something guy that's really working through some things, hanging out with them, imparting in them, but also realizing that there's a lot that you can learn from their thinking, their process as well. So those are life experiences that have really helped shape me.
Those are great, really great insights. Appreciate that. Anything that I haven't asked you that I should have? You'd like to tell me about what's going on with you or New Life, or anything you want to plug that you guys have going on there?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. I just, since you're talking about plugging, I just finished writing a book that hasn't been published yet. It's called Unstuck. And I wrote it because there are just so many leaders I feel are stuck. They're stuck spiritually, they're stuck vision-wise. We all reach those moments. I wrote it out of my own personal experience, but focused on Elijah's cave experience and how God unstuck him. And there's a lot of stories about urban church planting, leadership. But it's been incredibly beneficial for me to wrestle through the lessons learned in Elijah's cave. So that's not out. It'll probably come out this summer sometime, published by Moody Press. The other thing I would say, though, is that you haven't asked, but we've talked about before, is how in the world do we raise, train, launch leaders that have the DNA, the vision, the relational equity to fuel a movement? And we've been wrestling with that for some time, but I'm convinced that it has to do with life and life impartation, that there's no substitute for that. So we have been experimenting with a model of mentoring that we call Next Generation Leaders. We have a web page. It's not going to give you a strategy as much as some resources to do it, but it's NGL mentoring. For the last 4 years, I've spent several hours a week hanging out with 18 to 28-year-old young leaders. Life-changing for me. I look forward to it every week. And one of the most powerful things about that is that my son, who's now 20 years old, has been part of that process with me. I love that. He's in his second year of Bible college right now. And we've been meeting for several years, but with other leaders as well. Life and life impartation. You do not build leaders in a microwave oven. Leaders with value and vision, you have to take time to invest in them, and just that's one of the hardest things to get from most busy leaders, but that's one of the most valuable things that you can give.
That's great stuff. I look forward to that book, Unstuck, and also the website. I'll be checking that out too. NGL Mentoring. Is it .com or .org?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, we will look forward to looking at those resources as well. Mark, thanks so much for being with me today. And it's just always so exciting to hear what it is that God's doing in your church and in your life and in your leadership. And thanks for being out there on the front lines and leading so well, and for sharing with our listeners today.
My privilege. Thank you, Greg, once again. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.